Hello, Mazers! Welcome to Starr Mazer TV. Today's episode is Lore Mazer. Now, you might notice that today, the structure of the show, the look of it, is a little bit different. That's because I'm actually shooting from my HQ and not at Imagos Softworks HQ. Is out doing some Imagos film stuff, so he is very busy today. And so today, I will be taking over for him, and we are going to be discussing some of the cool new developments, and I will be chatting with this guy right down here, Auston Motville, the lead developer of Starr Mazer. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and get him in here too.
Hey there.
Hello, Auston. Welcome to Starr Mazer TV, Lore Mazer. How are you today?
I'm doing great. You?
I'm doing wonderfully.
How's everyone on the stream?
So I see that we have Cerberus, Sezui, and Cross Trooper on stream chatting right now. Yeah, they seem pretty good. I feel kind of bad. They're discussing about how they were unfortunately missed last Saturday, where Dawn and Viking Lass were playing Bonk 3.
I haven't gone through Bonk 3 myself. I think I played like a few minutes of one of the Bonk games. But they're like the Sonic of the TurboGrafx, right? They're like these classic platformers for another like split in the war of consoles back then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what Don was telling me. He was like, "This is TurboGrafx mascot," and as we were playing the game, it was quite fun. It was very well built. Bonk 3, though, it was funny because he played Bonk 1 and 2 extensively and never really played Bonk 3, and so when he fired it up, it started not meeting his expectations. He was like, "This is not what I remember. This is not very good." And eventually, he just kind of stopped and went back and started playing Bonk 2.
Okay, so Bonk 2 was still good though, right?
Yes.
Okay.
It was really just really never dug into Bonk 3, and then he tried and just wasn't having it.
Sweet. So I'll start up on Bonk 2 if I'm gonna be playing those Bonk games.
So to start us off, Cerberus put something in the chat earlier, that little post image.org image, which is this guy. So he sent us some Space Stew.
Thank you, Cerberus.
Cool. Nice little pixelated Space Stew. I see the little green tentacle and purple fruit back there.
We should just give this to Maximo and Eric. Be like this is a thing. It should show up in like a bar or a restaurant or something.
Yeah. This is happening. It's Space Stew.
Yeah, it's Space Stew.
All right, so let's continue on with Lore Mazer. So today we're going to be chatting about some of the cool new developments at with Starr Mazer. Cerberus actually has a question first. Cause I need to clear things up. People who got the $80 and up will get a physical copy. Correct, Cerberus. If you kickstarted us for $80 or higher, you will get a physical copy of the TurboGrafx 16 looking case with the jewel case and the little USB drive in there of Starr Mazer.
We're talking with the distributors right now to figure out like all the details on that. We're not allowed to say who the distributors are we? Is that still secret? We're gonna keep that secret.
Yeah,
Don's not here. We won't leak it.
Yeah, Don. If any leaks come out, it should be from Don.
But yeah, it's gonna be really good. These things are gonna be super authentic, and I'm very excited to get my own box copy of Starr Mazer as well. Just have to finish the contents that need to go inside. That's all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but so that's gonna be super duper exciting. Okay. Sezui also has a comment. Hey Kazuo, I told Endless Fluff to get with you guys yesterday, so hopefully hear from them soon. Their updated patch is awesome. I think he's talking about Valdis' story.
Yeah. I've played a little bit of Valdis' story now. I have joined the Valdis train.
Nice.
So thank you very much for sending us a copy of that game. It's like Symphony of the Night, just with like sort of different story and more in-depth mechanics. And Symphony of the Night is a classic game. I actually didn't play that until like much later after it came out, and then I sort of, as soon as I played that, I did this deep dive into like all the Castlevania games that were post-Symphony of the Night, like the Game Boy Advance ones and everything, which is somewhat related to Axiom Verge, which we've been playing recently, because they sort of took the ideas established in Symphony of the Night, and like a lot of people who make Metroidvania games today. The Vania really comes from Symphony of the Night, because that changed the way that those games were designed. It's really I don't know of games before it that were like that, but it brought a whole new level of exploration to these sort of Metroid style games. Plus, they incorporated the whole like level up system and the gear and the equipment. So it took exploration and added it with grinding, which are like this amazing combination. And they just sort of made Symphony of the Night, which is like a legendary game.
Nice. Yeah, I remember Symphony of the Night. Oh, so good. It's beautiful. But yeah, Axiom Verge was also tons of fun. Surface also has another question. How much of Project Appleyard is finished? 0 to 100%. I would say we are probably around 85% done. The music is in there. It's locked. VFX are going in there. Just about done. I believe we're at a fine cut right now. So now we're just kind of back and forth with the publisher, not publisher, sorry, the creator to see, if there any tweaks need to be made. So almost done with that. You'll be seeing it shortly. It'll be very, very cool. All right. So we should continue on to the story. So Austin, there's been a lot of cool chat lately about the story structure of Starr Mazer and how we're going to implement it, right?
Yeah. So last week on Lore Mazer, you might have seen. Oh, look at there's a whole bunch of things that you're showing.
Here we go.
This is the one that we want to show. So yeah, last week Don had talked about the sort of three options that we had for possibly presenting the story of Starr Mazer, all of which would succeed the goal of making a dynamic narrative that changes to the way based on the actions you make in the game. But they have different sorts of scope, different implications on how we design the game and how we approach it, and essentially the possibilities within it. So we had a big, huge meeting on Wednesday, so like almost a week ago now, discussing these three options in detail, figuring out how they would impact like each sort of team's perspective, which is interesting to say team because it's like, well, Alex is the music team, but there are like a bunch of people, but like he's sort of the main force for it. And like, I'm the programming team. I mean, of course we have Miles doing like extra stuff for us, and Don gives me like feedback on code all the time, but like our teams are 1 to 2 people. But either way, it was important for everyone to go off and think about like, how is this going to affect my development? And through that conversation, the main impact to art and audio across the board wasn't too different. It was basically just how much of the game do we have to build. And really, with any of these scenarios, we sort of have to build the same amount of content as far as art or music goes. So from that perspective, it wasn't too much of an adjustment. The only thing that's sort of different is how much we can scale the game based off of our scheduled plan. With the game coming out in April, that's our set deadline. So we need to complete all the content, have the game out by then. Now, how long it takes us to sort of experiment with the system, iterate on it, and get it feeling perfect, the more we have to do that, the less content we have to make. So the benefit in choosing a more modifiable system would make it so that we don't build too many assets and we aren't locked into something, which would encourage pushing the date back further if something messed up in the schedule. So, for example, Mode 1 has very set specific events that have to happen, and because of that, it's less modifiable in changing the scope. Whereas with Mode 2, or they all have names. I'm just calling them Mode 1 and 2 because that's what's on the screen. We had what was it? Careful Skyrim, Guided Sandbox, and Path in the Woods. Those are the names for them. But since we got it on the screen, we have Mode 1, which is sort of the Skyrim approach, which is that we have lots of dynamic events that come up in between core pieces of story. Mode 2 is Guided Sandbox, and that basically the narrative is a sandbox. You're playing episode to episode, and we're paying attention to those episodes so that it leads up to a grand climax. And then Mode 3 is Path in the Woods, which is that we literally have all of the characters' storylines happening simultaneously, and your events are affecting those lines. So every action adjusts all these sort of different train tracks, and where you are in the world is which ones you're seeing at that moment. So the one of the things is that Mode 1 had the most restrictive set on that, like this has to happen, like we need to have these core events happen. Whereas Mode 2, we could take out an episode if those assets hadn't been built. So Mode 2 is a little bit more versatile in what we could do to change our scope as far as art and audio is concerned. But most of them had sort of all the same implications on art and music. So I noticed that Cerberus said in the chat that this is very confusing to him. So maybe I should take a moment and explain some of the things in case in case you didn't see last week's episode. That sort of went into these. I will. Is that a good idea, Kazuo?
I think so, but so I'm not a game programmer. My involvement in Starr Mazer is purely social. I do all the social media stuff, and I'm not too involved in the creation of the game process. So when I was at this meeting, I was kind of like Surface. I was like, "Whoa, what is going on?" So let me take my stab at it as from like an outsider's point of view and see how right I am. So when I look at Mode 1 and you say it's like Skyrim, I think of like one overall narrative that, this is the main story quest that you have to do, and as you do them, it pushes the main core story forward. But in between, like the grand intro and like the climax of the first act, you have all these side quests you can do. You can go off other places. You could find out other things that don't necessarily push the main story forward. Since that's always just in the background and like is just your main story quest that you go through. And so in that way it's kind of restrictive that we only present you with one real story, but you can kind of deviate in there and perhaps we could create multiple results with, just triggering different events. But it would still just be like the same core story as you go through. Is that correct?
So that's mostly true, with a couple of fine adjustments in there. One of which is that all of those sort of side quests, we call them side quests, but it's sort of not giving them full credit. Those are all actions that the player is taking in the game. And those core events that happen during like the climax and the resolution, those are being modified by the actions you take in those side quests. So they're not really side quests in that like, oh, they're just there for like extra loot or extra abilities. No, they're there to provide context for the player to do actions in the game, for the player to make Brick do something, or to have an interaction with Bunny, or to encounter Jane in some way. And each one of those will result in something happening, and that will affect the climax and the resolution. So it's slightly different from just traditional models of that Skyrim would use, in that like they are connected and they have to be connected. But it's similar in that these side quests or events that you have to do, they don't have to happen for the story to progress. They are separate but connected when you perform in them. The other thing is that, one of the things that we're discussing is that you don't have to have just one core storyline. We could actually do multiple sort of larger narratives. And the more we do, the closer we get to Path in the Woods. But that would basically depend on our scope. Like if we build things really quickly, then we can have more core storylines. Or if we update the game after release, we can put another core storyline. So that's not locked in that it's the only way. But each one of those core storylines is sort of a solid line or a single line of narrative action that has its sort of climax and its resolution, modified by these side stories.
Interesting. Okay, so I'm starting to understand that. So the reason why we're not really going with Mode 1 is it's overall too restrictive for the type of story that we want to deliver to the audience.
Yes, but you're spoiling a little bit, because did we reveal which one we chose? Because we did in the meeting, but I don't know if we revealed here. So that's all right.
I know I would personally not pick this one because you said it's very restrictive, and as a gamer, man, I don't want a restrictive story at all.
Absolutely. So it has restrictive elements to its design. The benefits of it is that it's a lot easier to write for this. This is something that is fairly well understood in game development. There are examples of this having happened before. And really the innovations that would happen on this sort of structure for building the game would be that we would have to define interesting ways and sort of easy to develop ways for those side stories to affect the main storyline. But that's not a technically difficult task. We store some variables, and then we have like sort of multiple versions of the climax and multiple versions of the ending. Like an example, like Mass Effect 3 has done examples of this, especially with like the ending of the second game, how your actions throughout it can affect what characters live and die through that final mission. So there are examples of this working in the game, in the game development world. So the benefits to this are that it's understood to be built. Like we can go out, we can get help if we need to sort of approach this design. It's understandable, like everything that needs to be built. You plan it in the beginning and then you make it. So those are the benefits of it. But you're right, it is somewhat restrictive. When we make decisions, we're sort of locked into them, and it's not it's not as wide-reaching as we think the system could be. So those are reasons why we were less interested in it. It was basically, it's a known, like it's been done before in games. And yes, we could provide sort of a step up on the innovation in it. It's been done many times, and so it's less interesting with the amount of with the opportunities that we have here building an independent game.
Okay, yeah. So I totally get where you're coming from. So now, let's look at the opposite side of the spectrum at Mode 3.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as an outsider once again, when you guys were discussing Mode 3, what it sounded like to me was, rather than building like a core story element that's like, set piece A, followed by set piece B, followed by set piece C, depending on how you go through the game, it was, as I understood, when I saw ads for the original Elder Scrolls for Oblivion, they marketed the whole thing where you can follow around an NPC and you could see their world from waking up to going to work to going to their favorite store to shop to talk to their friends and then go back home and go to sleep. So they kind of programmed this AI behavior that you would just kind of encounter naturally through the game, and they would be in whatever stage of their AI that they were. And as how I understood Mode 3 was, it would be something like that for every character, but built up in a way where they would actively change the story. Instead of just performing like their same mundane routine, they could actually influence and start pushing events forward with or without you there.
And so, yeah, that is the tip of the iceberg of what Mode 3 is,
Okay.
Or this Path in the Woods. The key difference being that, when Oblivion implemented this, they did this with characters, NPCs, that don't affect the larger narrative of the world.
Mm-hmm.
So it's okay that they have their own routines and that they do things without the player interfering. But for them to control the narrative, that same AI and that same programming wasn't applied to core characters in the game. They're not going to go off and do something and close you off from being the hero. No, you're the hero. You have to go do that stuff. So Starr Mazer, in implementing it, if we had if we were to choose Mode 3, would be a scenario where the main characters are having that system. Like Bunny has her own goals and ambitions, and we code that in, and we have her do her events throughout the whole story, whether Brick interacts with her or not. Same with Jane, same with Darkstar, same with all the characters in the game. So they are all doing their own line, and if you just sit around and fly around in space and shoot things, you'll just hear about all the interesting events that are going on. But at any moment, you can dive in there, you can interact with Bunny, you can help her, you can hurt her, you can move the way the story goes by interacting with these characters. Basically, if you let the game run, there would be a storyline that happens with all these characters interacting and doing their actions, because they're going to make the same choice every time. But when the player comes in there, the player can make a choice. And one choice has this effect of splitting all the storylines and having them all bounce against each other, interact with each other.
Mm-hmm.
And that's sort of what we're bringing to it. And this is not a new idea in game development. In fact, if you talk to pretty much any game developer, they'll tell you their idea of this is the game I always wanted to make. And it's this. It's just the same idea. It's absolutely massive. It requires you to write everything that could possibly happen in a world. And although there are ways to build that amount of content, it doesn't matter. Even for a game with Starr Mazer, where the art is a restrained pixel art style. There's no in-depth physics in the game. We're using game mechanics that are fairly well understood, even though we're modifying and iterating on those. It's a game that looks and the mechanics feel like they could have been made 20 years ago. So that makes part of the game mechanically easy to implement, right? It's okay, you can build that because people were building that a long time ago. But this part of it, that's the huge thing. And even though we're making a game that parts of it could be made very long ago, in other words, parts of it are easy to make, the amount of content required that is still massive. It's still way blown out in scope. And to go with Mode 3 would require us to be very specific about how much content's in the game. Every time we add a character, it's like adding an exponential value to how much content has to be made in the game. Every time we add a new episode or a new event that can happen, that exponentially modifies the content of the game. So you have to be very careful in the choices that you make of what you add and what you remove. And every time you add something, it has huge implications over the massive game. So when you start building it, it goes quickly. But every time you add, it's big again. And then every time you add, it's more work than the last time you add. So it's not easy to modify this. It would be hard to do post-release content in the system. In addition, it is very likely that the game would be smaller than we originally envisioned if we were to choose Mode 3.
Yeah, it sounds just like a monumental task worth of programming and just writing. As you said, you have to think about everything that could possibly happen. And then once you put in a new character, everybody has to act and react to that character differently, and how that person adds or removes pressures from the world and the quest would all have to be taken into account by everybody else. Sezui says, a game that has tried this is Legend of Heroes. Are you familiar with that game?
I'm not familiar with Legend of the Heroes, so I would love to play that and see how that worked out. There's another example of a game that's done this, and it's the only game that we could think of that has successfully done this, and that's Dwarf Fortress. For anyone that's not familiar, Dwarf Fortress is, I like to call it like a Lord of the Rings simulator. Literally, every time you play it, you can play a story that is as epic as Lord of the Rings, and it's completely dynamically generated. Literally, there are like the context of the game is that you run a dwarf civilization. Like, that's what it is. Every block in the world, like every bit of the world, is completely dynamically generated. So like the way that like they go through like thousands of years of geological like modifications, so like rivers will form and they'll carve up mountains, and then rains will happen, like all the weather will modify the world, and it builds a world. And that's when you hit play, and then boom, you have like this little dwarf civilization. You have a couple of dwarf characters, and these characters have like they have names, they have histories, they have beliefs. All of their organs have stats. That is how much detail this game has. It has so much content and is so complicated to build that it's actually only represented in ASCII art. When you play the game, it looks like a console with a bunch of like slashes and pound symbols and like numbers all moving around the screen. Those all mean something. And then they also have colors, because if you just had characters, it wouldn't have enough. So a colored character means something different, right? Like, and then uppercase and lowercase is different. It's just massive, all the context of the game. Go ahead.
So as a testament to how much content, how long it takes to build this, how long have they been working on it, and is it finished?
Dwarf Fortress has been worked on for 15 years, and it's not done. I'm pretty sure the developers of this game are going to work on it for the rest of their lives, and it won't be done, which is cool. I mean, like, you can play it right now, like, and it is still very satisfying right now. But that's a lot of content, and they don't worry about visuals. Like, the whole other cool thing about Starr is like the interesting, like the amazing pixel art and like the sound that we have, the awesome like soundtrack and whatnot. You would take that out, and that's still 15 years of work, right? Like,
so doesn't sound like Mode 3 is very feasible. It sounds very cool in theory.
It's restrictive in a completely different sense from Mode 1. Mode 1 is restrictive in that when you make a choice, it's sort of hard to move from there. Mode 3 is restrictive in that every choice we make has huge ramifications to the amount of content we have to make, and it limits how much we can do, how quickly we can build.
So Cerberus has a comment, a game like Starr Mazer, where the story is one of the main draws, better have good character development, or else the main core of the game is ruined, right?
Absolutely. Just to sort of express that with an analogy, like, okay, you're going to play a platformer, right, like a Mario type game. If the core to a platformer is movement and jumping, if you have bad movement and jumping, it's going to be a bad game. So you expect the game designer and the programmer to be good enough to do that. With Starr Mazer, you're right. One of the main draws is having good character development. So to have good character development, you need a good writer. So fortunately, we have two great writers on board to write this, and it is their actions that are going to make the narrative of the game so great. Because in any of these systems, although we are building a dynamic narrative that is implemented through code, it doesn't actually remove any of the responsibility from the story writers. It actually just creates more work for them. The way, like, we have to build content at some point. When a character says a line, like, that line has to be written and it has to be recorded. We're not dynamically generating any of that with code. There are systems that can do that, but that's not sort of the experience we're building. Everything at some point has to be written by a writer, and that all has to be considered with the state of the game and sort of the where the world is at. So For example, if you were to write a TV series, traditionally you'll write an episode, and the characters will get to some point. The next episode has to understand that the characters have done things, and it has to reflect upon it, if you're making a serial sort of series. And so every time you write an episode, a bunch of actions have happened, and you have to write the next episode considering those past actions. Well, with Starr Mazer, you have to do that the first time, and then you have to do that again, because the player could have made a different choice in the first episode. So you basically write like whatever changes that would make to the story, and you do that many, many times. And every time you do that is a different possible player iteration. So the work is the same. The characters are at a certain point based off of the actions that they've made, and you have to write either dialogue or events that make sense for that. But the scope is larger for Starr Mazer in that the player can make different choices, which then makes it so that the events that have happened in the past are changing. And the dynamic aspect of Starr Mazer is that that will happen when you play the game over again. When you do a new iteration of the game, those events will happen in a different order, which means now the writers have to go through and make sure it works for that instance. So the work is the same. Yes, the writers will have to write great characters, and they'll have to be interesting development. But the scope is different in that they have to do that many times for each of the possible scenarios that the characters could be in.
So, talking about serial episodes, it sounds like Mode 2 of the story structure, where it is a collection of individual modules, story modules, that, based on the player's actions and how they proceed through the previous one, will determine which one they will go to next. And like a serial, every action that they've done in that previous episode will carry over and have some impact on the next one, correct?
Yeah, it's this weird combination of we're building a serial series as if we wrote it episodically. And the way you achieve that is by doing it in layers. Like each one of these, in Mode 2, each one of these sort of events are its own episode, its own self-contained narrative with like sort of a beginning, a climax, and an ending. And what's interesting is that we can write one of those and great, it's done, it's awesome. At the beginning, we understand sort of what's going to happen because we know what choices the player has made. It will modify, the events in there can change slightly based off of the actions that the player makes. And then when it ends, we sort of set the state of the world. Okay, these are the choices the player has made. This is the state of the world. But by having those sort of the beginnings and ends of those open for each episode, we can link them together in different ways. And we just need to make sure that when we write an episode, we consider the possible states that the world could be in. So every time we write an episode, we then go back and make sure, like, okay, that episode that I just wrote, does it affect this episode in any way? And you go through that and do that with each episode. So what's great about this is it's an elegant solution in between both of these, in that it's very easy to adjust the scope. We can simply remove episodes or add episodes. They are self-contained in that they don't have to have massive ramifications on each other. One episode could be written in that it only changes one or two things about the world, and therefore it's very easy for that to have that affect everything else in the game because there's only a couple of variables to track. But if we end up building the correct tools and we develop with the right mindset, if we plan correctly, then when we develop content faster, it's very easy for us to add new things to this. We can take an episode that only like modified 2 variables in the game world, and we actually have it modify like 10 or 20 because we have the time to go through that. And yeah, it basically allows us to easily scope and scale content while still achieving a very dynamic narrative where everything is directly affecting each other.
Cool. So that's the case with why we are choosing to go with Mode 2 over Mode 1 and Mode 3.
Yeah, that was the decision that we all came to. Interesting is that if you've been following Starr Mazer since the very beginning, like even before the Kickstarter, you'll think that's a little obvious because this is actually the one that represents best what we've been describing all along. Every time we've talked about the game and sort of all the decisions that we've come to, the way we've been building the game, everything has felt like this, and it's actually been what we've been doing all along. But you can make lots of choices when you develop a game. There's many, many ways to develop a game. And so design is sort of an interesting thing where there's not necessarily a specific right way to do it. Are we still on the line? My thing has adjusted.
Yes, we are still
awesome.
here.
Great. And so, yeah, there are many ways to build the game, and none of them are necessarily none of them is right. It's not like this is the right way to do it, right? Like, for example, like Mass Effect or Skyrim could have been built with any of these three systems. The reason why they possibly didn't is because, one, maybe the scale of their team was good at doing that. Two, they might not have known about these sort of techniques to do it, because when they were building those games, they were laying the foundation for their idea. Like our Mode 1, they created that, right? Or at the very least, they iterated on it to get to the point where it's that solid. And so when you design something, you might not have come to an idea of something like Mode 2 without having Mode 1 existed. That's why we're able to sort of look at these things that have been discussed a whole lot and pick a new solution that we haven't seen done before, but elegantly solves a lot of our problems. But even so, we were pretty certain on that. But we wanted to double check on that, just because you don't know, like, if you just make a decision and go with it, that might not necessarily have been the best decision for the development of your game. And if you're going to spend the next year spending tens of thousands of hours, or however many it's going to be, I don't even dare to count the numbers of hours that it's going to go into it, you want to make sure you're making the right choice. So we wanted to take a look at all the possible options for how we could go about building the game, really go into depth into how each of those affects the code in the game, how we're going to write it, the game mechanics, how we're going to build assets, and make the one that gives us the most amount of freedom, which has the highest potential of giving us the most interesting, ambitious version of Starr Mazer that we can build with the resources that we have been provided by all of our backers.
Mm-hmm. That's good. I mean, as you said, we want to make sure that we get the correct or the best practice of story creation that we can right off the bat, rather than working a year and putting tens of thousands of hours into something that we would just abandon.
Absolutely, and this happens all the time in game development. Like when I write a piece of code, that's probably not the last time I'm going to write that piece of code. We're going to playtest the game, we're going to iterate on it, or we're going to start working with that code and realize that it requires us to make the game in a certain way that could be slow. And we might have thought of, it would be so much easier if I could just do this one action, or why is this why do I have to do 5 steps? We could do this in 4. Mm-hmm. I just might not have thought about that when I was writing the code. And so with that feedback, I can then actually change the way we do it, and thus result in a scenario where we can, as we continue to iterate in the game, it goes faster. This is sort of like the feedback loop of building tools, and it's been a lot of my work over the past few months.
Well, speaking of your work, that's a really good segue, because you've been posting some really cool content. Now, you'll probably see this on the stream in about 30 seconds. What I'm looking at right now is the screenshot of the dynamic dialogue system that you've created.
Okay. I don't have the stream up. Is that the image that I sent you earlier today, this morning?
Correct.
Okay, so yeah, if you're looking at that, you're going to look at that and goes, that looks kind of boring.
I have no idea what's going
windows,
on.
Right?
It just looks like a program with lots of text.
Yeah, so visually, this isn't really interesting because the dialogue system is an underlying system. It's a bunch of code that relates a bunch of actions or events that have been written up by the developers. The interesting part of this image is that the console output in the bottom right section, there's a couple of bits of debug logs there. Because that's actually the system working. And so today is very exciting because I have finished writing a system that is a much better way to do dialogue in the game. So this has been one of the problems that I haven't really been able to solve in the game. And this is our 4th time iterating on this concept. So earlier, I've actually talked a whole bunch, and people have watched on the StarRmazer.make streams us working with the event system. And the event system is a really powerful tool because it allows developers of the game without any coding experience to actually build aspects of the game. And for some sections of the game, this is actually very powerful. For doing cutscenes, for doing specific animations, for building shmup patterns, this is a very good tool. For loading up scenes, for placing in assets in the world, it's good for a lot of that because it's very visually based. It's very much like talking about taking an asset and putting it in a scene and applying actions to that asset. So you're directly, okay, I want to look at the table and I see the table there, and how do I want to interact with that? I can directly see that table and interact with it. But there are some restrictions on this. And when I built this system, the main case that I didn't fully consider was how to deal with dialogue in a format that isn't based off of a tree. So, for example, traditionally when you do a dialogue system, you either have a complete linear event where it's just a line of dialogue plays, and then the next line of dialogue plays, and the next line of dialogue plays. That's what you see in like a book or a movie or anything like that. Any sort of linear medium. That's how it will progress. That's very easy to play, or that's very easy to build. You write a line, and then you have it trigger the next line until it's done, and then you have sort of an end conversation event.
Yeah, and then when they click on it again, you just repeat it.
Exactly. The next step up is doing a dialogue tree, and this is very good for games that heavily rely on player-driven action. So when the player is going to engage with a character, they need to get information from that character. They need to possibly say a specific line that will progress a storyline or make an event happen. That's very good because basically what you do is you have the initial state of the character talking with another character. So you have player and other character. There's a couple things the player can say to that character based on where we are in the game. So you have your tree and you have a couple of lines of dialogue. When the player picks one of those, then that line splits off into a bunch of other possible options, and you basically have this large upside down tree. That's why it's called a dialogue tree. This is very easy for you when you want like the player to be able to go through information quickly. When you want them to you don't want them to miss any piece of information. Like if I ask you, if there's 3 questions I want to ask you, each one of those results in you saying one line, I might want to ask all 4 of those questions. So it's very easy to build it in a single tree and go back through that many times. What a dialogue tree is not good is having many different states of the game that can affect it. For example, when I have 3 states in a tree, that's because I have taken one action, which is talk to character. But say I have 2 other events that I'll edit that. So I have talk to character while I'm holding my gun and talk to character while I don't have my gun.
So let me stop you there real quick.
Okay, yeah, before I go
into
it. Yeah.
when I look at this and I'm looking at all these close-ups of the debug code, it says things like created query, concept C Slimo, value 1.
Yeah.
So that means the game during this dialogue tree is checking, do you see Slimo?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then I see other ones down here that refer to other things. You know, joke about shooting with score 6. And so it just sounds like that you're requesting all these values during this conversation, and these are what is affecting when you're saying that that these things are changing the dialogue trees. This is what you're checking for.
Yeah, so I'm about to sort of get into the connection
Okay.
of how we got to that step. Going back to the issues with the dialogue trees is that, yeah, like every time we want a variable to affect the conversation, we have to build an entirely new dialogue tree. And not only that, but every choice in the dialogue tree is going to be modified by these variables. Like it might not just be like if you approach someone and have a gun or have not, but it's like if you say the line 5 entries in, like 5 lines into the conversation, and that changes based on you having a gun or not, that's a whole other tree that has to be built. Basically, it becomes completely unwieldy to make a dialogue system that incorporates so many variables. I mean, like you can do it, you can brute force it, but that's not an elegant solution. That takes a lot of time. It's very hard to manage. So there needs to be a better way to do this. And it was a problem that I was constantly encountering. Every time I was doing tests with our dialogue system, I was constantly encountering this issue that like I can't get enough variables to affect their conversation without just absolutely exploding the amount of work that has to be done for the writer. So I actually had been taking this question and I approached a bunch of people with it. Fortunately, I went to an indie event recently, this is a good example as to why, if you're a game developer, you should go talk with other game developers. I talked with one, Zach Aikman, who is working on Galaxy. He's been a guest on Starr Mazer TV before. Really awesome guy, very smart programmer. I come up with him and I go, hey, like I'm having this trouble with this dialogue system. And before I can even explain all of my problems, he goes, yes, there's an answer for that. And he already knew what the problem was. And he goes, yeah, I was like, wait, like what's going on? I was like, yeah, there's a system that we implemented in Galaxy. So he goes over and he shows me the system that they built. And it's based off of a talk from 2012 at the Game Developers Conference, a system that Valve ended up building over the course of 4 games. And so what's interesting about this is if I had just like sat down and thought about this, I probably wouldn't have come up with this system. But Valve was able to come up with a system by making many games and making tiny iterations on it and improving the system till it got down to the point where it was an understood very simple system that's very easy to implement, that has a wide range of possibilities. And I'm about to talk about the sort of the details of the system, but here's an interesting note. When I started on the project, Don had actually presented me with this exact same system. It was a system for a project that he was working on that's codenamed Final Act. And him and the Pixel Jam guys that he was working with, like Miles, had actually built a version of the system. And they had designed that system over the course of 4 years of doing various iterations. So Valve and Don and his team came to the same conclusions, which is sort of more of a good benefit of proving that, like, this is a system that works. That, like, different people from different sort of concepts, different backgrounds, came to the same conclusion. Unfortunately, the difference was that when Don presented me the idea, he presented it to me from a single perspective, and it was how to achieve it in that way. So I actually implemented many of those features into our event system. But one of the things that I didn't get from his explanation was, how do these things get triggered? That was the one part that was missing. It's what I didn't build in the event system, and it's what I was able to find out by watching that Valve talk and going through the document, and also having Zach explain it to me. So, having been presented that idea a week ago, we now have that working in the game, and that's what you see on the screen there. The way that this system works is that there are a bunch of, we identify a bunch of rules and responses. And a rule is a list of conditions that must be true for a response to trigger. And so I don't actually have the image directly up in front of me, but if what I can remember, there's a condition there that says that a rule is true because there's 6 entries that match. It has a score of 6. And that's because this rule has 6 things that must be true for it to happen. In this case, it's Brick saying a line to Slimo, I haven't shot you yet. I think that's the one it is. And there's many different ways that Brick could say that line. If Brick and Slimo are friends, that's going to be a much different line than if Brick and Slimo are enemies. Like, literally, the text can be exactly the same, but the way the voice actor delivers it, that's going to be different. The connotations that it has, that's going to be different. The responses that follow after it are going to be different. If they're friends and Brick says, I haven't shot you yet, then Slimo might make a joke about that, like, that's actually not going to matter to him because he's immortal. But if they're enemies and Brick says, like, I haven't shot you yet, Slimo might draw his gun because it's a threat, and, like, he doesn't like being threatened. It doesn't matter whether Brick can do anything about it. He doesn't take that kind of crap. So in building the system this way, we can have an event happen based off many different possible scenarios. And they're very easy to generate what we call rules. Literally, you write a line, you write all the things that have to be true for this to happen, and then you write a response for it. And that's much easier to build as opposed to a dialogue tree which has to consider all of these different options and have its own branching path, and a different dialogue tree that has all the options except one of them modified with a different branch, and then another dialogue tree with all these options but one of them modified in a different a whole branch. Instead, they're all completely self-contained responses that can change the state of the world and reflect the state of the world. Does that... Kazuo, as a non-programmer, have I explained that well, or is there any other questions that you might have about that?
So that explains things pretty well. It's basically that you are creating rules about the world that govern how people or objects are going to respond, and depending on how those things shift, it'll start pushing it down other avenues. So instead of creating like hundreds and hundreds of dialogue trees that branch off on their own, it might just create a little offshoot that something else might be said, but as long as other variables are true, they might gear back onto a different conversation thread. So instead of, branching out, it's just kind of like an intertwining path that can jump around depending on which variables and which rules are met. Now, yeah. I find it interesting. I remember you've told me the game that the system from Valve came in, but I don't think you've told the audience, because when you told it to me initially, I was like, that's actually quite interesting, because I've experienced the system in-game, and I never thought about it, but then now thinking about it, about how my actions and the state of the world affected when things were said, it kind of took me back for a second. I was like, wow, actually, that's really cool.
Yeah, so this actually... this system, a version of it, has been developed since Half-Life 2, but the system was really sort of perfected and put into strong use in Left 4 Dead 2. This system in Left 4 Dead 2 drives the way that characters interact with each other. When you look at environments, the characters will respond. When a character gets taken out, depending on who's there and in what condition they're in, they'll give different responses. If you get attacked by a zombie, what type of zombie is it? Where are you located? Is that zombie have certain aesthetics to it? All of those things are the conditions which indicate what rule will trigger what response. So it was a very simple way for them to build sort of dynamic dialogue in the world of Left 4 Dead 2 to have it respond incredibly well based off of any state the game could be in, because they built a game that they wanted to be incredibly highly replayable. There's only so many episodes, but it's fun and engaging because of the game mechanics and the way that the scenario is built up. Their whole AI director works in the game. They need like that. The AI director, I don't know exactly how it works, but I would venture a guess that there are many similar features sort of in place determining how the director decides what difficulty and what sort of events to send at the players. And so they needed a dialogue system that could reflect that, because every situation in the game could be potentially different. You could have different survivors in there, different states of the survivors. You could have gone down different paths. In addition, not only did they need this dynamic system to be able to just react and feel appropriate for the world, they needed a way to express narrative in the game world. And dialogue was a very good way for them to do it. So by having characters make different choices by simply being in areas or making choices in the game, which is shooting or not shooting, right? They were able to develop a narrative between these characters.
See, that's really cool because, going back and thinking about my playthrough through Left 4 Dead, when you pick up pills, depending on the state of the other characters, they might respond differently, like that they might need it or they don't need it or that it's here. If they already have something in their inventory and they can't pick it up. So that to me, as you said, is a very dynamic system that's really cool. It's much better than, once you hit this point in the episode, every character just says this line, like, we need to get out of here, or something basic like that. That would totally kill it. So that's really cool. A real-world example of how this system is in place and how it's kind of informed your decision on how we're going to be moving forward with our dynamic narrative system.
And what's really awesome about this system, there's a couple of things that are very powerful. One, it's very easy to author content. The biggest problem that I had with the last dialogue system isn't that it didn't work. It worked just fine. It's that it took a long amount of time to make content. And we want to build a lot of content for Starr Mazer. It gets better with the more content that we can develop, because you aren't necessarily going to encounter all the content of the game. So anything that can make us develop content faster is beneficial. In addition, it's very easy to scale this. Like, because content's easy to make, and because these aspects of content are completely separate from each other, we can add content elegantly without worrying about it destroying the game, or we can actually make it so that it does affect every aspect of the game. It's the choice of the content writer. It basically gets me out of the writing kitchen. I give this tool to our writers, and they can just write the game and not have to worry about restrictions of the content of implementing this or how it affects everything else. They define all of that. So I'm not in the kitchen messing up with their writing, or I'm not restricting their writing capabilities. The system really encourages and empowers them to make the choices that they want for the story to be the best it can be for Starr Mazer. In addition, this system is actually incredibly versatile. Although there are great examples of it working for dialogue, it's not just for that. This system is so generic that you could use it for many things, and we're going to use it for more things in Starr Mazer. One of the first things that I can think that we're going to use it for is determining what episodes appear. Just like we have a bunch of criteria to indicate whether a rule is true or not, to determine whether a character says a line, we can actually have a bunch of criteria of the world state indicating whether or not an episode should appear or not.
That's cool.
And that is all very much affected by the choices you make in the game.
That sounds like it sounds like a dynamic way to present the user, the player, with different episodes that wouldn't necessarily be easy to figure out right away. Because I mean, that's one thing that always got me about video games, is video games that said it's whatever choice that you want to make, and then present you with a binary decision, and it's very easy to see which path you're going to go down based on a decision like that. And now to hear about a dynamic system like this, where it's going to be checking for different variables, not necessarily everything that you're going to be aware of or in direct control of, and that could determine what's going to happen next. That sounds like a very organic system. It's just like you can't consciously try to trigger the next episode. Yeah, it would just be too many unknown variables that the game is just kind of quietly tracking in the background. And it sounds really cool.
Yeah.
We should probably answer a couple questions that I saw fly through in the chat, mostly by Cerberus. Cerberus first asked, he said, I believe, dumb question, the trailer that he recently saw, is that just a video or is that actually gameplay?
Which trailer is this? Like the Kickstarter one?
Correct.
So that trailer is actually video, but when we were first working on the project, so before our Kickstarter even launched, basically my task was to make all of that work in the game. So I spent a lot of time bringing assets into the game, and there's a very interesting thing happening on chat right now.
I know, I see.
Talking in like one-line characters, which is interesting. Cerberus and Laser Kid just having a great old time. But anyway, while that's going on, yeah. So the trailer was just video. Then I took a bit of time to implement all those aspects into the game to have that functional. So those scenes, bits of those scenes, like we can play. Of course, those are all a bunch of disconnected scenes. The assets were built for that sort of section. I've been able to repurpose some of them so I can make like certain dialogue, certain shmup levels and certain walk-around areas. But yeah, like that all had to be built, and that was built much later than when the video was made.
Mm-hmm. Cool. And then I believe there's one other question from Cerberus is asked, Slimo is immortal? Question mark?
Oops, Leak Mazer. Next question.
Cool. So now that was a really cool discussion about the dialogue system. Now I also saw another screenshot that you recently posted up, which is the difficulty modifier. Yeah, this little extra. So this, first off, we're looking at a picture of Unity 3D, and we're seeing a modular representation of, I believe, a shmup section of the game. And you have this required difficulty event trigger up there.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me a little bit about this?
I can't. Will the world break if I share my screen? Can I do that
On Skype?
Yeah.
It will not break.
Awesome. I'm going to share my screen mostly because I took a little bit of time to do this thing that I want everyone to see. So we're going to go to conversations, and we're going to go to share screen. Yeah, we're going to share this screen right now. Awesome. So you can see what I'm seeing right now. And this is the thing that you're talking about, right? This little required difficulty bit thing that I'm moving around?
Yes.
So this is a little slider. What I really like for this is that it changes color. And that's the whole thing that I wanted to show you.
Nice.
Zero difficulty is a nice cool thing, and high difficulty is a nice red thing. That's a little visual thing that I was messing around with. So required difficulty, this is a trigger in our event system. In past episodes, I've talked a little bit about how our difficulty system for shmups works. And basically what we did was we defined a difficulty curve for a level. And as you progress through the level, that difficulty will change. I might actually be able to bring up an example of that in one of our prefabs here, if I can find it. But yeah, there's basically we have these levels, and we can indicate, if I show you this right here, this is one of the difficulty curves for one of our levels. So basically, as we travel along the curve, it's very, very easy, and then suddenly it gets dramatically hard and then drops off. So this is a scenario like, I'm making something up here, but this could be a scenario where you're traveling through and you're expecting something to be around, like maybe you were expecting to encounter a bunch of enemies, but nothing happens, and then it's an ambush, and you have to deal with this ambush. So
okay.
That's the way our levels work, in that we can assign a curve for it. And then, because when we send enemies at the characters, when we send patterns of shmup enemies at the player, those are dynamically sent. We have to take a look at the state of the world, this case being the difficulty curve, and what can we send at the player? We don't want to just randomly send things at them, because we might send a whole bunch of difficult enemies in a row, or we might end up sending like a bunch of easy enemies in a row. So this is a trigger which indicates how high the difficulty has to be in the level for this to trigger. So if it's at like 0.16 or like basically a tenth, like the level has to be at least very easy for it. But if we put it all the way up to like 0.93, this will only happen. We will only spawn this enemy when we're at the sort of most difficult section of the shmup.
Okay, so is this something that would be checked constantly, or would this be checked at one point in the level where it's like, okay, check the difficulty curve if true, or if it meets my threshold, then go ahead and do this?
This is checked many times. We have sort of an interval, which is one of our other modifiers for the level. So if I go back to the level manager, I can see that we have the difficulty curve, which we're going to take a look at. We have this other aspect called the frequency curve. The frequency curve is the same sort of idea in that we have this curve that moves over the course of a level. And this indicates how often we make events happen in the shmup level. So this is basically a counter. We start at 0 at this bottom area of the graph, and we start counting up. And when we hit the green line, that's when we're going to spawn something. So what this scenario looks like is that we'll spawn enemies sort of infrequently, and then we get to a point where we spawn a bunch of enemies, and then that very quickly drops off, and then we start spawning enemies slower and slower as the rest of the level goes out. So this frequency indicates how many times we're going to look for an enemy to spawn. And every time we decide we want to look for an enemy to spawn, we go back to this and we look through all the enemies that could possibly show up in this level at this point in the game based on who you've pissed off in the galaxy. And we're checking like, okay, we need to send something at the player. What's the difficulty of this? Is it high enough for us to be able to send this enemy? If it is, like, what other things can happen? And we can use any trigger in the game to sort of indicate this. So we can do everything from, not only do we identify like what is the difficulty of this, but we can also identify like how many of this type of enemy have you shot down in the game. We only want to send like we'll send like some boss pirate if you shot down a bunch of pirates because that boss heard that you've been pretty badass in shooting down a bunch of their dudes. So they'll come at you if you've destroyed a bunch of them. Or it could be a scenario where like, you pissed off this one character. This one character is connected to this part of the Federation, so the Federation ships start coming at you because it's corrupt or whatever. Those are triggers that are basically, as far as the code is concerned, just as valid as this difficulty. But it's just one more thing that we can tie to it. And so, yeah, required difficulty is the tip of the iceberg of how our shmup system works at the moment. But to be completely honest, I'm actually thinking of making adjustments to this system based on some playtesting that Don and I did over the weekend.
Cool. So, I mean, iteration's always better.
Yeah, absolutely.
Better and better.
So I'm going to go back to regular screen, if I can do that. There's a way to switch back to regular screen. I'll figure that out in a little bit. There we go. So, yeah, but that is what that required difficulty means.
Cool. That's very cool to see the shmup in action like that. And it's also good to hear that, based on iteration, that it's only getting better. Cerberus had an interesting comment that said, make sure you use the difficulty meter wisely. People hate difficulty curves that suddenly turn easy or hard. Mm-hmm. Now, if it were to turn easy or hard, it would be for a good reason, as you said, like an ambush.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so one thing there's a bit of abstraction there. Although I'm calling it difficulty curve, it's not in the aspect that you might think of a broad range of a game that like, okay, you've got level 1 and it's like this hard, and level 2 is level harder, and level 3 is a lot harder, and then level 4 is kind of the same, and like the sort of like pacing that you would find in a game. Difficulty curve for us means what are the types of things that we're sending at you? We use difficulty to indicate like, okay, I think this enemy is this difficult to destroy, but difficulty can basically mean a bunch of different things in a scenario. Like how challenging is it for the player to deal with this one aspect? And so, yeah, the narrative will largely drive sort of what types of difficulty curves we want to experience. Like, in the case of the ambush, it's not that like, oh, all of a sudden it's very difficult. It's that all of a sudden there are enemies attacking, as opposed to there being like no enemies or like very simple enemies. We could make like that required difficulty wasn't attached to a specific enemy. It was attached to a specific pattern, and a pattern could not be just like one enemy spawning, but it could actually be a whole series of enemies. So a difficult pattern could be a swarm of 20 units. But if you have a gun equipped that's really good at dealing with swarms, that's actually easier for you as a player. Now we have a different enemy where it's like, it's one like big giant high shield like low hull enemy that's very difficult to destroy. So we have it as a high difficulty. But if you have a gun that's really good really good with dealing with shields, then that might not be a challenge for you. Whereas on the opposite, like we might raid an enemy that's like not super difficult, but it's got a lot of shields. If you can't deal with shields, then it's actually a little bit more difficult. And so that brings up a bunch of questions of the design that we have to answer. How dynamic is difficulty? Are we going to be looking at the state of the player's weapons and modifying that trigger based on that? Like, how do we modify the difficulty of a pattern based on the state the player's in? How involved do we want to get with that? And we'll find out through playtesting, basically, is the answer for that one.
Yeah, it sounds like we're approaching dangerous territory where it's like I'm almost dead, and what would be difficult is if an enemy was so quick that it would just run into my ship and kill me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I could just see it like as you're starting to get like beaten down, it's just like, oh, it's just gonna throw the thing that you don't need right then to destroy you.
Yeah. So yeah, the Cerberus mentions in the chat, so the difficulty curve isn't the game's fault, it's the gamer's fault for pissing off so many people. There are many ways to make the game more challenging for yourself, and pissing off powerful people is a way to do it. But, pissing off someone could also make them, irrational and arrogant, and that might actually be the key to winning them. So much like life, it's a little bit more complicated than just raw numbers, but eventually we have to boil it down into raw numbers to actually code the game. So hopefully we do it in a way that feels realistic, that actually reacts to the situation at hand.
Mm-hmm. That's really cool. So this is some of the really cool stuff that you've been working on lately. We've also been able to see some of the really, really, really cool art that Maximo V. Lorenzo has been making. Mm. So this is actually pretty exciting. Speaking about shmups and difficulties, we have this super awesome GIF. This is a iteration of, I believe it's the Vulcan cannon weapon.
Yeah, so it's interesting to see this like actually implemented. This is an idea that Don's been talking about for a very long period of time because he hasn't seen this in a game before, so he's really excited about it. The idea is that this is a very fast, high-powered, high-frequency firing Vulcan cannon. The interesting thing about this is that generally when you have some sort of automated weapon, there'll be tracer bullets in there, so you can sort of see the line of fire. And you often put that in games because it looks exciting to see those lines. Now, we're already going to have tons of weapons where you can see the bullets in them. So Dom wanted one weapon that felt very unique. And the way this works is that the bullets are fired at such a fast rate that you can't see them. You cannot track them with the human eye in this case, or even aliens with their alien eyes. Maybe some of them can track them. But for the case of this, we're playing from the perspective of a human, and we can't see it. So what happens is that the bullets travel so fast, and you only see the impact and the muzzle of the flash, and you don't see any of the bullets in between them. And it hits instantly. When the bullet fires, it will, in that same frame, damage the enemy. So it's an incredibly fast weapon. You don't have to worry. You just have to literally line up the ship with the enemy, and you will hit it. It's not about predicting a shot and making sure they go into it with some of the slower weapons in the game.
So yeah, seeing this animation, it's quite cool because you can see the muzzle flash at the beginning, you can see the initial sparks, and then from there you only see the impacts and no traveling bullets.
Yep. And there's also, you might notice there's little details that happen in games all the time that require a little bit more of implementation. So, for example, take a look at this. If you took a look at this weapon, you're like, okay, I'm going to go program this weapon. All right, I press a button, and as I hold the button, it fires bullets, and that happens. But if you look at the animation carefully, there's a little bit more to happening. You'll notice that there's sort of a startup time when the cannon's about to fire. There's this flash that sort of bellows out from the muzzle. So that means that's an extra thing that we have to code in. When you press the button, it doesn't fire right away. The Gatling gun has to start rotating. It has to warm up. And there's not even a full second where it's preparing. So now when I go to implement this in the game, I have to make it so that when you press the button and hold it, there's a charge-up time. And we record that time. And while that's charging up, we're playing an animation that shows it charging. Then once that time gets full, then we're in firing mode. So now we have two modes, firing mode and charge-up mode. So then we're firing it, and then it works how you might have expected. I'm holding the bullet, I'm holding the button, it's shooting bullets. Mm-hmm. But there's one other thing in this animation that's also a small detail, is that when the bullets stop firing, when the gun stops firing, there's also a few of the bullets are still coming out of the cannon. And those last few rounds get fired, and they actually still impact the enemy, in this case, some sort of structure, which we won't detail. And yeah, so there's a few more bullets that actually keep hitting. And those aren't going to be aligned from the ship because they're already have fired. So that means I need to make another state for this weapon, which remembers where the player's last position was when they stopped firing, and it has to fire a few more rounds from that position because the last bullets need to go through and impact their enemy. So it's interesting because you look at a weapon, you're like, oh, if I was Dakota, I would just push a button and it would fire. But there's a couple more details that are really going to make the feel of this weapon. It's going to feel heavy. It's going to feel powerful because there's this moment, this charge to it. And then the sort of the release afterwards that you can fire something and sort of forget about it and watch it blow up just like with a few bullets later. So that means you can release the button and know that the enemy is going to die because there's a couple more bullets that are actually going to hit it. That's going to indicate the feel of this weapon. So there's a lot of detail there, but it's important to us because we want each weapon to really feel unique, not only in its animation and its presentation, but how you actually interact with it.
Very cool. I like that idea. I see the charge up in there, and I see the last few bullets that go in there. I mean, as a gamer, I don't even think about systems like that, and just to think that you have to record the last position of the ship when the button was released, and then fire off a few more shots there, it's making me go nuts thinking about this stuff. Like, well, what if you had like two different planes, and it's shooting the first plane, and then they go somewhere where that plane isn't, so it starts shooting the background of it, and how to record things like that, how to make sure it doesn't go through things, and what happens if you shoot a small enemy, what happens, I don't know, it just starts boggling my mind.
Yeah, I have this realization that I do when I play video games, because video games are completely intentional. At some moment, someone had to write a line of code that indicated that an event happened, which means everything that happens in a video game, someone did that. The way a menu pops up, the way a character walks around, the way a certain animation plays, the way a character interacts with collisions. So every time I see something in a game, I realize someone did that. Someone made that choice, and it gives you a different perspective on sort of the work that happens, what you're actually playing. If someone makes a little cape flutter, someone did that. A little flutter on the cape. Someone made that happen.
Somebody had to program it. Somebody had to draw it. Somebody had to tell it when to do it.
Yeah.
And in what instances it would. Now, speaking about the attention to detail that Cerberus was saying, we also have this one. This is the storyboard of the actual shot itself. So basically, this is Maximo detailing what happens if you shoot a wall, which we were seeing earlier, versus when you hit an enemy with this, and how the explosion for this particular weapon is going to interact. And so I think this is another very cool display of just minute attention to detail.
Is this is this the storyboard that he posted today with the blast and everything?
I believe so.
With the two shots in perspective, right?
Yes, let me look for that real quick.
Yeah, because that's actually a different weapon. That is not the Vulcan cannon one.
Correct. Yes, this is a vented plasma caster.
The vented plasma caster. Yeah, this is an interesting weapon. That is it's really cool because Maximo's doing a thing that I never thought of. This is actually the weapon that you see in the trailer, the twin laser. But Dom was like, okay, we've got this weapon, we need to make it awesome. Every weapon needs to have a good purpose. Every weapon needs to feel really good. So he's like, do something with this, guys. So Maximo started taking a look at it, and he made the visual changes first, which sort of indicated how I was going to adjust it in gameplay-wise. And one of the things they did was really cool is that instead of having the lasers on top of each other, that's not how the Star Wolf fires its cannons. It has two cannons that are side by side, not one on top of each other. So if you want them to be two guns, they actually have to be in perspective. It's a tiny little detail that I've never seen implemented in any shmup I have ever played. So I'm actually I'm really excited that he just moved them. He just scaled one and put it in the background. It's gonna look super good.
Yeah. So we're looking at some footage from the trailer, and it just looks like your traditional shmup machine gun, where it's just two bullets on top of each other, the same size. And then, yeah, as he shows here, he makes the rear bullet on the left side of the plane smaller, just for perspective, and that's a really nice little touch.
So there's a bunch of, I'm gonna go off a little tangent. There's a bunch of people that showed up in the chat, so I want to say hi, NS Man, and Ziski, and Littlest Bo. It's great to have you all here.
Yeah.
But I need to do a little PSA. Big Bold Flank just chatted, I'm in traffic. I hope you're in a bus. Because if you're in a car, that is very dangerous, sir. And I don't want anything to happen to you. So I appreciate you listening to this, but you shouldn't chat anymore in chat. And don't respond to this, because if you're driving, that's dangerous. Do not text and drive is very dangerous. I yell at people on the team about that all the time.
When you drive, just drive.
Yeah.
This will be up on YouTube later.
Yeah, the public service announcement by Auston. That could be the title of this episode. Safety first.
Exactly. Safety first. So this is really cool. So we've got some really cool developments on the art side of the team. I think that moves on to the next order of business, which is actually my little segment that the fan art contest will be starting up later this month.
And so tell me all the details of this fan art contest, Kazuo.
Yeah. So there's going to be a fan art contest. We're going to try running once every month. It'll last for about 30 days. So we are thinking about starting this next contest May 15th and having it end June 15th. So you have about 30 days to create your art. We're going to be posting up on StarRmazer.com. Not until the 15th. We're going to be posting up on StarRmazer.com the rules, the official character arts that you are going to be basing your art off of. So we're going to post up a picture of Brick, for example, and maybe one other character, and then your job is going to be creating a fan art depiction of them. You can also include other characters, but it has to have them, and so we'll have some cool concept art of them. We'll also include a theme, so it'll keep you on your toes. So it might be something like speed or escape or, you know, interplanetary travel or just something like that. So you could draw them in a cool, interesting scenery. There's going to be 3 winners picked every month. There's going to be 1 winner picked by all of us at the Starr Mazer team. There's going to be 1 winner picked by you guys, the fans. We're going to have a little forum so you can view all the artwork. You can checkbox the one that you like the best, and at the end we'll tally all the votes, and that person will also win a grand prize. And the third one is a lottery, so it's just going to be a completely random draw. So, you know, even if you are a beginner artist, we still want to see your awesome fan work because you guys are awesome and we care about each and every one of you. So even if you might not have technically the best skills out there, you'll still have a chance of winning in the random draw. So the 3 winners will get a digital key to the film Motivational Growth. They'll get a digital key for this first contest. They'll get a digital key for the Motivational Growth original soundtrack. And then they'll get one of these guys, right? Space 2. This guy. So these are called shikishi. This is Japanese autograph paper. They are very thick, nice, gold-rimmed pieces of paper. And what Maximo V. Lorenzo is going to do is he's going to create a custom character art on this, as well as sign it, and then we'll send this to you. So you'll have this really nice shikishi Japanese autograph paper poster thing. These are about 1 foot by 1 foot in size that you can hang up on your wall. It'll be super nice. And so each grand prize winner will get one of those, as well as 2 additional keys. Later, as we do other contests, we're going to start giving away things like video game keys as well. But we'll always include this shikishi, so whatever character that we give the concept art out for, that we'll ask for the fan art contest, you'll get them on one of these cool hand-drawn, one-of-a-kind posters. If we're not scanning it. We're not going to create a digital copy of it. It's yours. Only one in existence. So that's super cool.
Those are super cool. I have like one from like this anime that I know of, and it's like sort of a little coveted thing. But they're not. The ones I have are small. Like this is a big one. This is a foot by a foot. That's awesome.
So yeah,
I've got a question though, Kazuo. Like, I don't know. Art has many different meanings. So when you say fan art, do you mean drawing lines on a piece of paper? What about things like making cakes or cosplay? Or karaoke. I don't know. I don't know if karaoke's art. But like, what are the restrictions of art?
The restrictions of this art contest are going to be, it has to be an image. So, I mean, it has to be, you have to send it in as like a JPEG image so we can display it out to everybody on live on Starr Mazer TV as we go through them. So that means it could be a photograph. It could be a photograph of, you know, a still life that you've made. It could be a photograph of food that you've made. It could be a digital painting from Photoshop. It could be a scan of a a physical painting that you've made, but it just has to be an image in a digital form that you can submit to us, that we can check through all of them and take a look at. So that means you could also create a 3D render and then render out a 2D image from that and send that in as well.
Sweet. It could be like a brick stew, maybe.
Yeah, that would be cool.
It could be a mod for a game that some game developer has to update, but he still hasn't done it because he's too busy working on Starr Mazer. I wonder when that will come out.
So yeah, so that's really cool. That'll be firing up. My goal is to get this up and live in about 10 days. So when you go to starmazer.com, you'll be presented with all the rules. It lets you know what's going down, how to submit it, and from there there'll be a simple form to submit it, and we'll start taking a look at all that stuff. And then once the contest ends, the 15th of the next month, that's when I'm going to create the form, the voting form, and we'll have it open probably for about 4 to 5 days. I'll be advertising it every day on the social networks, on Twitter, to get everybody to go vote for it, get your friends and get your family to vote for it, so they can all check out this awesome art that you guys have made, and then we're going to gear up and do the next one, and it'll be lots of fun.
Sweet. What about animations, actually? What if someone like goes and does a full-blown, Starr Mazer cartoon? That's not a JPEG, that's an animation.
So this is an interesting thing. Will we accept things like YouTube videos or GIFs? That I don't know. Come back in 10 days, and the contest rules will say whether we'll take that thing. I'll have to chat with Maximo about this. We'll get some concrete rules of what we're going to be looking for. I know there's also been a lot of talk about another type of fan art contest that would be regarding music with Alex Maurer. So I've also been kind of in talks with him. You never know. Maybe next month after that we might have something that has to do with music for you guys.
That would be sweet.
That'd be cool.
I remember enjoying the Themix contest greatly. Though I still listen to some of those songs.
Oh man, I have it on a master playlist. I listen to it all the time. And if you guys want to check it out, it's available on our SoundCloud page at soundcloud.com/Starr-Mazer. And all of the great Themixes are there. They're all great. They're all awesome. You guys did a wonderful job. So that is the fan art contest. It'll be coming up later this month. Now, as we start to close this show, Auston, on the horizon, I noticed that we are not doing the traditional pre-production production thing. Correct?
Yeah. So we were talking the other day, like figuring out. So now that we have we have a very strong understanding of the narrative structure that we're building. We are putting more of the tools in place to go about doing that. But still, although we've decided, all right, this is the narrative we're going to do, there are almost no examples of this narrative working very well. So that's a risk in game development. We're doing something that hasn't really been done, at least not to the scale that we're doing it before. So traditionally, when you're going to go about developing a project, there'll be a couple phases. You'll have your pre-production phase where you plan out everything. You do all your conceptualization. You'll prepare all the technology you'll need, and then you go into a long form of production where you're actually building all of the content, and then you wrap that up in post-production. So the thing is, that's a really great idea if you know exactly what you're going to build, or you've sort of built this before. And yes, although many of us have built games before, we never built a game like this. And so we want to make sure that we test these ideas to make sure that we're on track. There's a potential that some of the technology we build, or some of the ideas about the way the mechanics work that we want to put into the game, don't necessarily feel right. So we're going to go about and focus on a vertical slice. Originally, I'd been building a playroom to sort of serve as a design like a playable design document for the game. No, that's still important, and we will still get to that to a certain point. We've changed course a little bit and trying to focus on something that's a bit more polished and a bit more playable. And the reason being is that we want to make sure that these tools are set in place, that we have something we can look at and go yes, that is Starr Mazer, or no, that's not Starr Mazer, we need to modify this. So what that will result in, sort of a longer idea of what the pre-production phase is, because essentially this vertical slice that we're building, this demo, is still considered pre-production. That's fine. generally it's best to have a longer pre-production phase if possible, because that's when you really nail down your ideas and you can solidify more of the concepts. So we're working towards now to build a few episodes of the game to interact and play with. And so we're writing a couple of episodes, hopefully episodes that we will be able to put in the final version of the game. We're building out the assets that we need for that. And we're just making that. So it's changed my production schedule a little bit in that some of the game mechanics I haven't quite implemented in the game yet. For example, the shop system. I haven't put that in the game yet. We're probably going to hold off on that unless this episode needs that shop. And we'll actually be building a sort of fully playable series of episodes before we get to some of the more outlying mechanics that are not necessarily essential for those episodes. And that sort of changed the production of everyone else as well. Like Maximo, although he's doing visual design for all of the characters, he will probably end up focusing on the characters that we're just implementing for this episode and let the other characters develop them more later. So it's a slight shift in how we're doing things to really nail down something that's playable, and I'm hoping to be playing that at the end of the month. I feel that from the code perspective that we'll get there, but there's lots of different aspects of that, and we'll be building a lot of tools to make all that happen. So that can take a bit more time. But yeah, that is what we're currently working on right now. So we are the writing team, Don and Vanessa, are working on an episode right now to pitch us what we'll be working on, and we're going to take a look at that episode tomorrow and figure out all the content that we need to make for that episode to be implemented and playable.
Very cool. So it sounds like hopefully within the next month or two, we'll start having preliminary builds that we can start playing on Starr Mazer TV.
Absolutely. Now, these will not be anything close to the beta builds that we'll be releasing up for play. That's going to be something that's going to be a lot more focused. We want to make sure that even if you're beta testing, the first time you experience Starr Mazer, it's a solid Starr Mazer experience. We don't want to be in the situation where you play the game, like a beta version of the game, be like, oh, this isn't what I thought it was, and we're like, well, it's not done yet. So obviously, we won't be finished with the beta version, but this early version that we're going to be playing and testing and showing off on Starr Mazer TV, it will still be a few steps away from the beta version that we want to get feedback on. Of course, not that we won't want feedback on this one, but just not feedback by you playing it by downloading off of our website.
Yes, we want feedback if you watching us play it.
Yeah, absolutely. It'll be it's more focused playtesting at this point because there'll be large systems that we're like, yeah, we know that's not done yet. Like, oh, there's no collision in that area. Whatever, that's fine. Like, it's not important for what we're working on at the moment. But when we get towards that beta release, okay, having all the walls you collide on, that's actually going to be important, so no one doesn't crash the game, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Cool. So it sounds like from here on out, it's going to be building content and iteration.
Yeah, I mean, like if you have built games before, if you check out anything about building games, iteration is sort of the most important aspect. Even if you do a more traditional production model where you define a pre-production and you go out building it, which is what I did for Sports Ball, even that is highly malleable. You have to have a strong understanding of what you're going to build and understand sort of the entire game before you go into production. But when you go into production, you'll find out that certain mechanics work. Some are more important than you thought. Some aren't nearly as important. You cut features. You add things in based on how your players are doing it. And you really judge each week by the playtests that you run and sort of how the game is feeling. So even in that traditional model where you plan everything out in the beginning, you only plan as much as you know, and you need to drive your game development by playing it constantly.
Mm-hmm.
It's very easy to tell for a game developer if a studio has released a game. It's very easy to tell whether they played their game or not. There's certain aspects of the way a game feels and the choices that the sort of things that were focused on in the game. You can tell whether it was designed from someone's mind or designed by iterating on it. And it's sort of it goes down to a lot of just feel of the game. Which is very important to me if you've played any of the games I've made in the past. Having it feel right is the most important thing for me. So we will be heavily iterating on playable concepts.
Yep. And Cerberus, don't worry, we will be taking all the fan feedback into strong consideration.
Mm-hmm.
So don't worry about that. If you guys, we'll be sure to listen to your comments because you guys supported us. You guys basically bought the game from us. So we want to make the game that is the best for you guys.
Absolutely.
Cool. Well, is there any other closing comments for this episode of Lore Mazer? We already discussed all about the fan art contest, your brand new systems that you implemented, the new artwork that Maximo V. Lorenzo has been putting into the shmup sections of the game. and the story structure that we had giant meetings about.
Yeah, I mean, we covered sort of what we've been focusing on in the past week. The only thing is, I want to get back to making Starr Mazer. I've
Cool.
enjoyed the time with you all, but I want to make the game.
Well, you've got a job to do, man. I've got to get back to editing some behind-the-scenes videos for everybody. Well, sounds like we've had a great show today. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. This was Lore Mazer, where we discussed all things recent about Starr Mazer, all these cool new developments. And be sure to check out next Thursday, where we have Star Jams with Alex Maurer taking you guys behind the scenes of the music of Starr Mazer, followed by Starr Mazer Plays on Saturday, where Dawn and the rest of the crew will be playing a video game together. Cool.
Bye,
Well,
everyone.
see you guys later. Have a wonderful day. Thanks for tuning in.